What if the very institution that once raised her to royalty just tore her crown away in the dead of night? There were no grand proclamations, no balcony appearances, no smiling portraits of the perfect royal couple. Instead, what the world saw was far more disturbing. A single photograph of Catherine, Princess of Wales, being driven away from Windsor Castle, her eyes swollen, her expression numb, her hand clutching a crumpled tissue. Behind the tinted glass, a story was ending. One that began with love, pageantry, and global admiration, and was now crashing into betrayal, protocol, and power. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. But why? Why would Prince William, the man who once said Kate made him feel like himself again, walk away from his wife of over a decade? Why would King Charles, in one of the most cold-blooded moves since his own scandal-ridden divorce from Diana, strip Kate of her future crown by declaring her unfit to be queen? And perhaps the most disturbing question of all, was this a sudden implosion, or had the monarchy been preparing for her removal all along? Because buried beneath decades of carefully curated public appearances and press-controlled palace narratives lies a version of events that very few want to talk about. A version where the future queen was no longer seen as an asset, but a liability. Let's be clear, this isn't just tabloid fodder. This is the potential unraveling of the entire modern monarchy. The Kate and William fairy tale wasn't just about love, it was political theater. A carefully designed machine to make the royal family look young, fresh, and future-proof after years of scandals, affairs, and frigid press relations. Kate was supposed to be the safe bet, the anti-Meghan. The modern but modest English Rose who smiled, waved, and never made waves. She studied the rules. She waited nearly a decade for her ring. She learned the royal walk, the royal silence, and the royal sacrifice. But what if she learned too well? What if, behind closed doors, her loyalty became control, her composure became manipulation, and her perfection became impossible to manage? According to whispers from high-ranking courtiers, Kate Middleton's steady climb up the royal ladder was not without enemies. In fact, one of her biggest critics sat on the throne itself. And over time, those quiet reservations allegedly transformed into something far more calculated, a secret operation to destabilize her standing, document her missteps, and eventually remove her entirely. Why now? Why, after years of smiling family portraits and joint engagements, would King Charles suddenly declare her unfit to serve as Queen Consort? According to multiple insider accounts, it wasn't just one thing. It was a perfect storm. The pressure to modernize the monarchy after the Queen's death, the increasingly visible strain between Kate and Charles during public outings, her disappearance from the spotlight under the guise of medical leave, which sources say was not entirely about health. And perhaps most critically, an explosive series of behind-the-scenes events surrounding a canceled royal tour, a secret intelligence report prepared for the king, and an emotional standoff between William and Charles at Balmoral Castle. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's go back. Let's return to the beginning of this story, or at least, the version we all thought we knew. Because to understand why Kate cried behind closed doors while William walked away from the only woman who never sold him out, we need to look at what changed. And more importantly, who wanted it to change. Let me ask you this. Do you really believe royal divorces happen overnight? Or do they begin with tiny, almost imperceptible shifts, like the sudden replacement of a staff member, a broken protocol, a missed curtsy, a letter left unsigned? Because in the world of crowns and courtiers, nothing is accidental, and nothing is ever what it seems. Sources close to the palace insist this unraveling didn't begin in 2025 or even 2024. It began years earlier, in the shadows, in the shifting glances between Kate and Camilla during engagements, in the occasional public frost between William and Charles, in the subtle distancing of Kate from key royal charities, in the elevation of Camilla's own public profile. This wasn't a collapse. It was a quiet war, one where loyalty, blood, and silence were all weaponized, and where the person who played the royal game perfectly for over a decade suddenly realized she wasn't a player anymore. She was the pawn. But here's the twist. She wasn't going down without leaving a trail. Because according to some insiders, Kate documented everything. The meetings, the betrayals, the psychological manipulation. Some even claim she wrote letters. Private correspondences meant to be released only if things fell apart. And now, those letters might just surface. So where does this leave William? Torn between a father desperate to preserve what's left of the royal image and a woman who once promised him the one thing he never had growing up, peace. If you think this was a clean break, think again. There were tears. There were screams. There were palace staff reportedly removed at midnight. And there was one meeting at Balmoral where King Charles allegedly looked his son in the eye and said, "She cannot be queen. Not now. Not ever." We'll unpack that explosive moment later in the video. We'll also examine the secret dossier reportedly compiled on Kate by royal aides, the bizarre Australia rehearsal that turned into a meltdown behind closed doors, the eerie silence of Princess and, until she broke ranks, the reemergence of Rose Hanbury and what that really means, and the letter Kate allegedly wrote to her children as she walked away from the only life they've ever known. Make no mistake, this is not just a family breaking down. This is an institution swallowing its own. The crown has always demanded sacrifice. But this time, the sacrifice wasn't expected to fight back. And as for Kate, let's just say, if you think she's gone quietly, you haven't been paying attention. Because behind those tears is a storm. And before this is over, the very foundations of the royal family may never look the same. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Because the real story doesn't begin with tears in a car. It begins years earlier, with subtle signs, whispered doubts, and one very specific palace report that would ultimately lead to the most public-private disaster the firm has seen since Diana. So let's start at the first tremor, the one no one saw at the time, the one that cracked the crown. And what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What does it look like when a royal marriage begins to silently fracture? Not with fireworks, not with scandalous affairs, at least not at first, not with dramatic walkouts or televised interviews. No, it starts with something far more dangerous. Silence. A prolonged glance not returned. A missed call. A canceled public appearance with no explanation. And then distance. In Kensington Palace, where everything is choreographed down to the placement of a wine glass, these cracks were never supposed to show. But they did. Slowly. Relentlessly. And for those who were watching closely, especially the ones behind the velvet ropes, the signs were there. So here's the question. Did Kate Middleton's fall from grace start with a single misstep? Or was the stage for her eventual humiliation set from the very beginning? When the monarchy decided she was perfect enough to be elevated, but never truly trusted enough to ascend. Let's rewind. Because to understand why King Charles eventually deemed Kate unfit to be queen, we have to revisit a period the palace never wants to talk about, the quiet years. The years after the royal wedding, after the baby photo ops, after the Netflix documentaries and tabloid gossip wars. The years when everything looked fine, but nothing really was. The smile that never slipped, until it did. For over a decade, Catherine, Princess of Wales, perfected her role. She was elegant, controlled, gracious. Her wardrobe became diplomatic. Her movements, scripted. Her expressions, studied. She rarely, if ever, misspoke. To the public, she was the monarchy's most valuable PR asset. The stable wife. The doting mother. The woman who, in stark contrast to Meghan Markle's headline-dominating years, never complained, never explained. But behind the scenes? Sources close to the royal rota began whispering something curious in 2023. A notable shift in energy. Kate was becoming overly cautious. Her team reportedly began canceling more press interactions than usual. There were murmurs of tension with William's advisors. Even the Queen Consort Camilla was said to be growing concerned by Kate's increasing autonomy. Autonomy. That's the word that rattled some in the palace halls. Because Kate wasn't supposed to be autonomous. She was supposed to be compliant. But in private meetings, particularly with her personal charities, she was allegedly pushing back. She wanted more control over media strategy. She asked to adjust speaking engagements to include more personal storytelling. She even requested to sit in on diplomatic briefings ahead of international visits. On paper, this looked like leadership. To Charles, it looked like threat. Tensions rise between king and future queen. Multiple palace insiders confirm that Charles and Kate had vastly different visions for what the royal family should represent post-Elizabeth. Charles wanted modern appearance with traditional substance. Kate, by contrast, believed that modernization meant changing the inner culture of the firm, not just its press release language. She wanted new blood on the advisory team. He wanted legacy protectors. She wanted to digitize royal communications. He wanted to rely on the tried and true. What followed was an increasingly frosty dynamic. Courtiers began noticing that Kate's debriefings with the king were becoming shorter, sometimes ending abruptly. There were reports that she declined a personal invitation to a royal art gala in Sandringham, which would have placed her at Charles's right hand. Some say she cited scheduling conflicts. Others say it was strategic defiance. Whatever the truth, one thing became clear. Charles had started viewing her less as an asset and more as a variable. And in the monarchy, variables are dangerous. The disappearing act, illness, or exit strategy. In early 2025, Kate vanished from public view. The official explanation was medical, a recovery period after an abdominal procedure. The press was respectful at first. The public sent well wishes. But as the months wore on, questions mounted. Why weren't there more updates? Why did her staff become less responsive? Why did Buckingham Palace begin handling all communications directly, bypassing Kate's Kensington team? Then came the photo. A grainy, paparazzi-shot image of Kate being helped into the back of an SUV, visibly pale, wrapped in a coat too large for her frame. Next to her, not William, but a senior female staffer known for liaising with royal legal counsel. The tabloids speculated health concerns. But for those who had followed the firm long enough, it smelled of something else. Control. The ghost of Diana, and the curse of the perfect princess. Let's pause here and ask the question no royal reporter dares to say out loud. Did Kate Middleton inherit Diana's fate? Not the adoration. The trap. Diana was loved because she was raw, emotional, real. But those traits also made her uncontrollable. Kate was loved because she was composed, uncontroversial, unwavering. But those same qualities eventually made her expendable. Why? Because the royal family doesn't like outshining. And by late 2024, Kate's approval ratings were quietly eclipsing the king's. Her public appearances drew larger crowds than Camilla's. Her name brought more donations to charitable causes than Charles's decades-long campaigns. She was, quite literally, the face the monarchy used to stay relevant until she wasn't. Behind the smiles, tension in the Wales household. Now, let's turn the spotlight inward. What about William? Insiders say he was growing increasingly distant in early 2025. One source noted that their public interactions became robotic, that every gesture felt rehearsed, like they were performing for cameras they thought were watching. Another leak, this time from a palace footman, claimed that Kate began staying in a separate wing of their Norfolk estate after a blowout argument surrounding an upcoming engagement where she was reportedly told to pull back from press spotlight. The message allegedly came not from William, but from Charles's private secretary. Still, the damage was done. Kate began attending fewer engagements. William began going solo more often. And the speculation intensified. Was this a marriage in slow decline? Or a woman being isolated by the very system she once upheld? The break in Balmoral. In the summer of 2025, the family was summoned to Balmoral. The setting was familiar. Balmoral had long been the Queen's sanctuary. The place where truths were faced and royal decisions finalized. It's where Diana found herself unwelcome, where Meghan and Harry first realized the rules weren't bendable. And now, it's where the final fracture between Kate and the crown reportedly occurred. According to an explosive leak from an anonymous aide, the king delivered a quiet but resolute message during a closed-door meeting. Her health, her temperament, her relationship to the public. It's not stable. It's not sustainable. William allegedly sat in silence. Camilla said nothing. Princess and, we're told, grimaced. But the message was clear. Kate would not be queen. Not under Charles's reign. The calm before the cataclysm. Back in Windsor, Kate re-emerged briefly for a solo charity event. A children's hospital she had long championed. Observers noticed the subtle changes. A more somber expression, a stiffer wave, a shorter speech. And for the first time ever, she didn't wear her wedding ring. The media noticed. The public noticed. But the palace? Silent. And that silence? It said everything. Because in the world of royalty, denial is confirmation. Deflection is strategy. And when no one is speaking, it means something irreversible is already underway. But then, someone inside the palace began speaking. A junior aide. An anonymous email. A journalist with decades of royal contacts. The subject line? She's not going quietly. And just like that, the game changed. Because if Kate had decided to push back, to break her silence, even subtly, then the monarchy wasn't just facing a PR nightmare. It was facing a reckoning. One that would tear open decades of deception. One that would expose Charles. And one that would leave William standing at the crossroads of history again. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What kind of king collects a dossier on his daughter-in-law? Not a rumor. Not palace gossip. A documented, deliberate, classified operation. Compiled, updated, and analyzed over months. And the subject? Catherine, Princess of Wales. That's right. Sources from within the monarchy, people once loyal to King Charles himself, claimed that at the heart of Kate Middleton's fall from grace was a file. A private, highly sensitive, highly restricted file. Referred to behind palace walls as the Consort assessment. But what was in it? And why did it exist in the first place? Let's peel back the curtain, because this was never about one headline, one dress, or one argument. This was a systematic collection of perceived flaws, subtle missteps, and psychological red flags used to justify one of the most shocking royal reversals in modern history. A reversal that didn't just humiliate Kate, it rewrote her royal destiny. It started with a whisper. According to palace insiders, the earliest drafts of what would become Charles's so-called Queen Unfit dossier were assembled in late 2023, long before Kate's public disappearance in 2025. At first, it wasn't called anything formal. It was just notes. Observations. From whom? Multiple senior royal aides, including one with a long history in Clarence House, and another recently reassigned from Sandringham. But the trigger? A pattern. They reportedly noted. Increasing episodes of emotional withdrawal during high-pressure events. Conflicts with communications staff about unscripted statements. A reluctance to attend back-to-back public engagements. And, most controversially, private conversations with foreign dignitaries that allegedly strayed beyond royal boundaries. These were not public-facing issues. But to Charles, these were red alerts. And so, a directive was quietly issued. Begin compiling a personality profile of the future Queen Consort. The language of power, operational fitness. Let's be clear, this wasn't personal gossip. This was administrative language. Bureaucratic coldness wrapped in tradition. The file's official title? Consort Operational Fitness Evaluation, Catherine. Sound clinical? That was the point. By using language steeped in logistics, the palace disguised something deeply emotional and deeply political as something neutral and procedural. So what exactly did the file contain? Leaked descriptions include transcripts from Kate's post-engagement briefing sessions, psychological assessments from palace-approved counselors, staff exit interviews referencing tense dynamics and anxiety-inducing leadership style, footage logs from public appearances with annotated notes such as unresponsive, visibly irritated, refused cue. Even more explosive? Reports of private communications between Kate and non-royal consultants, namely branding experts, PR advisors, and one ex-BBC journalist known for spinning narratives. Charles viewed this as a dangerous breach. To him, it suggested Kate was attempting to construct a personal royal brand separate from the firm's control. In other words, a Diana repeat. The Camilla connection. Let's ask the uncomfortable question. Was Queen Camilla involved? One source says, not directly, but not uninvolved either. Camilla had long held a complicated relationship with Kate. Not openly hostile, but certainly layered. In public, she was supportive. In private, she reportedly found Kate's over-refinement and PR-calculated demeanor tiresome, even disingenuous. She's all satin and mirrors, Camilla allegedly quipped during a private dinner, according to one leaked anecdote. More critically, Camilla allegedly believed that Kate was trying to eclipse her in terms of soft power. She may not have authored the dossier, but did she encourage it? Did she benefit from it? Absolutely. Because as Kate's image faltered, Camilla's stability was suddenly reframed as vital to the monarchy's survival. William finds out. Here's where the story takes a devastating turn. Because eventually, William saw the file. One insider claims it was during a confidential strategy meeting. Just 3 people in the room: the king, William, and the principal private secretary. The file was placed in front of William as proof that Catherine needed to take a step back from royal duties. Not permanently, just for health. But the message was clear. Kate was no longer an asset. She was a risk. And the crown doesn't take risks lightly. William, according to those present, was visibly shaken. At first, he rejected the premise. He defended Kate, cited her loyalty, her consistency. But Charles pressed. He allegedly said, "We are not questioning her value. We are questioning her readiness." And then the clincher. You have to ask yourself, is this the woman who will protect the crown when it matters most? Let that sink in. The future King of England was being asked by his own father to doubt his wife's fitness for monarchy, the incident that sealed it. According to a trusted royal aide, the final entry into the dossier was the most damning. An internal rehearsal for the 2026 Australia tour, involving simulations of diplomatic press engagements, cultural exchanges, and public speeches. This wasn't unusual. All royal tours undergo protocol briefings. But this time, something broke. Kate reportedly refused to deliver a pre-approved statement written by the King's press team. She argued it was tone-deaf and patronizing to the Australian public. Instead, she allegedly attempted to substitute her own version, a more human, personal version, one that highlighted Indigenous contributions and condemned colonial legacies more explicitly than the palace was comfortable with. The exchange turned heated. Staff were stunned. William tried to mediate, but the damage was done. The entire simulation was cancelled. Within 24 hours, the tour was postponed. Within 48 hours, Charles had the final update added to the file. Operational divergence confirmed. Consort protocol breached. Long-term viability compromised. The leaker within. So how do we know about the file? Because someone inside wanted us to. In early November 2025, a journalist with historic palace contacts received an anonymous tip. A USB stick containing redacted images of document headers with timestamped logs. No full pages, no names, but just enough to validate the document's existence. And with it, the truth became impossible to deny. This wasn't about health. This wasn't about stress. This was a palace-engineered takedown. And Kate? She was the target. Why now? Why not earlier? Why not later? Why pull the trigger now? Because the monarchy is vulnerable. Queen Elizabeth II is gone. Prince Harry is estranged. Public faith in the institution is at a generational low. And the one person holding the entire PR illusion together, Kate, was no longer controllable. In Charles's eyes, she had become Diana 2.0, and he wasn't going to let that story repeat. So he chose preservation over family, the crown over the couple, and protocol over peace. But what he didn't expect was that Kate had seen the file. She knew, and her silence wasn't compliance. It was strategy. Because if you think this dossier was the final word, think again. Kate had already begun writing her own. And what she was about to do next, no one in the palace saw coming. What happens when the man trained since birth to preserve the monarchy is forced to choose between the woman he loves and the institution he was born to protect? That's the question Prince William has been silently wrestling with, not just in the past few weeks or months, but for years. And now, the reckoning is here. This chapter isn't about Charles. It isn't about Camilla or Kate or even royal protocol. This is about the man in the middle, the heir, the bridge between tradition and transformation, the son of a broken marriage, the father trying to avoid repeating his father's mistakes. And yet, here we are. Because if the king thought William would simply comply, he didn't know his son as well as he thought. Let's go behind the headlines, behind the press releases and palace photo ops. Let's dive into what really tore William apart and why that inner war may have forever altered the monarchy's future. The moment that shattered the illusion. You remember the royal wedding, that sunny April day in 2011. The cheers, the cathedral, the smiles that looked real because they were. William and Kate weren't just a ceremonial couple. They were friends, partners, survivors of a decade-long courtship that tested both of them. They were solid, weren't they? And that's what made the revelation of the secret Queen Unfit dossier so devastating. Because it was never just a judgment on Kate. It was a judgment on his judgment, on his loyalty, on his legacy. When Charles slid that dossier across the table, the dossier you just learned about in Chapter 2, William didn't say a word for a full 60 seconds. According to one palace aide who stood just outside the room, you could hear the weight of silence. No paper shuffling, no murmurs, just silence. And then, he pushed the file back, didn't open it, didn't even look at it. He said only this: "She's my wife." But Charles wasn't done. He leaned in, not as a father, but as a monarch, and dropped the sentence that would haunt William for months. "And I'm the king. Choose wisely." The Phantom of Diana. What do you do when your father repeats the very cruelty that destroyed your mother? Because let's not pretend Diana's ghost isn't hovering over this. William lived through it. The silencing, the gaslighting, the press manipulation, the cold shoulder from the palace machine. He watched his mother unravel, then rebuild, only to be cut down before she could ever escape the shadows of the crown. Now, almost 30 years later, he was watching it happen again. To Kate, his Kate. But this time, he was being asked to assist. How do you reconcile that? Privately, William began pulling away. Multiple insiders confirm he canceled or rescheduled more royal briefings in late 2025 than in the previous 3 years combined. He stopped showing up to weekly meetings with the king. He declined private dinners with Charles and Camilla on 2 separate occasions, a breach of expected protocol. And perhaps most tellingly, he returned, quietly, to Amer Hall, their old countryside escape, the one place he and Kate felt normal. Or at least, they used to. Because now, even there, the walls were listening. The counselor meeting that changed everything. Let's pause here and talk about an event almost no one knows about. In mid-October 2025, William was seen leaving a discreet private practice just outside of London, not far from Kensington Palace. The building is known for housing high-profile psychological consultants who work with government officials and aristocrats. It's the same firm that, allegedly, consulted Charles in the 1990s during his public rift with Diana. Why was William there? The palace refused to comment. But a source familiar with the firm confirmed this. It wasn't for a marriage consultation. It was about decision fatigue. It was about trauma. It was about what you do when you're the only person in the room expected to be both human and historical. In short, William was cracking, not because he didn't love Kate, but because he was being cornered by his inheritance. The man who called at midnight. Here's a twist you didn't see coming. One night, during the height of the tension, William picked up the phone and called. Prince Harry. Yes, you heard that right. 2 brothers, once inseparable, torn apart by a continent and 1,000 wounds. And yet, in the darkest moment of William's royal life, he reached for the one person who had walked away. What was said? No transcript, no recording. But insiders say the call lasted 47 minutes. And afterward, William didn't return to the palace for 3 days. Coincidence? Or clarity? Because who else but Harry could understand what it feels like to lose control of your own story. To have the crown decide who you are and who you are not. The father torn in two. We often think of William as a future king, a royal, but he's also a father. And this, above all, broke him. George, Charlotte, Louis. 3 young heirs. Innocent, observant, and now, caught in the middle. Insiders claim William was terrified that public exposure of the royal rift would damage his children's ability to grow up free from scrutiny. He didn't want them to relive his childhood. Paparazzi in trees. Therapists at 10. Grief counselors at 12. And so he tried to stall. Tried to negotiate. Tried to ask Charles for time to resolve matters internally. But Charles wasn't budging. And neither was Kate. Because while William struggled with indecision, Kate had already made hers. A marriage of equals becomes a marriage of silence. By November, the silence between Kate and William was no longer subtle. They slept in separate wings. They attended different events. And on Remembrance Sunday, an event that has long symbolized unity in the royal family, William was seen wiping his eyes after the ceremony, standing alone. Kate was nowhere to be found. Officially, she was recovering. Unofficially, she was done being ignored. And then came the confrontation. The Windsor confrontation. The moment William finally opened the file. It wasn't Charles who made him. It was Kate. According to a palace source, she walked into his private study at Windsor, placed a copy of the dossier on his desk, and said, "You can either read their version of me, or you can ask me what's true." William reportedly stared at the cover for a full minute, then said, "I want to hear your version." They spoke for 4 hours. No staff, no recorders, no interruptions. But what came out of that conversation would fracture the firm forever, because Kate didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't beg to stay. She simply said, "If you believe them, I'll go." And William, already crumbling under pressure, was left with the most impossible choice. Believe the institution that raised him, or the woman who made him whole. The final family summit. Balmoral. Again. Charles. Camilla. William. Princess Anne. And for the first time in years, the Queen's private legal counsel. William stood before them all and delivered a decision that stunned the room. We're separating. Privately. For now. He wasn't ready to announce a divorce. But he was no longer pretending everything was fine. The room went cold. And, according to a source, simply nodded. Camilla said nothing. Charles, red-faced, reportedly furious, stormed out of the room. And with that, the Wales marriage was no longer a question. It was a countdown. The legacy left hanging. So here we are. William, heir to the throne, son of a broken monarchy, brother to an exile, now husband to a woman exiled by the crown's own hand. How does history remember a man like that? As a coward? As a hero? As a king who let love slip through his fingers? Or as the only royal with enough humanity left to break the cycle? Time will tell. But one thing's for sure. The crown now has no safe harbor, because William has stopped protecting the illusion. And behind the scenes, as Kate packs her things and prepares for a life outside the palace gates, another secret is brewing. A letter, written by Kate, intended for the public. And once it's released, it will burn every lie to the ground. It was supposed to be a triumphant return, a royal tour designed to remind the world and the Commonwealth that the future of the monarchy was in safe, elegant, capable hands. Australia. Kate and William. Together. Reinvigorating the royal brand in a country growing increasingly restless about its ties to the British crown. But what the public never saw was that this tour never actually happened. Why? Because it imploded before it even left the ground. And the explosion didn't take place in front of cameras or in public. It happened behind closed doors, in a private rehearsal, at a confidential location in Buckinghamshire, in front of a small group of senior aides, cultural advisors, diplomatic handlers, and, allegedly, a hidden recording device. This was no ordinary prep session. This was a stress test. And Catherine, Princess of Wales, failed it, at least in the eyes of the king. But what really happened inside that rehearsal? And was it truly a failure? Or a setup? Let's unpack what many now consider the turning point in Kate's royal unraveling. The moment when her fate shifted from future queen to imminent liability. Why Australia? Why now? Before we dive into the disaster itself, let's talk context. The idea behind the 2026 Australia tour was ambitious. Charles, facing mounting Republican sentiment in Australia and New Zealand, needed a soft power campaign. Something that didn't look like monarchy propaganda, but still reminded the Commonwealth of its royal connection. Enter William and Kate. Polished, beloved, safe. They weren't Camilla, with her complicated past. They weren't Charles, the symbol of imperial leftovers. They were the photogenic bridge between tradition and tomorrow. The royal team began drafting plans for a spring tour through Sydney, Melbourne, the Gold Coast, and even a visit to Uluru. It was meant to be historic, emotional, personal, and above all flawless, which is why the palace decided to run an unprecedented full-scale rehearsal of the trip's key moments. Except what they got was something they never expected. The pre-tour simulation, a royal first. A month before the tour, the couple was brought into a confidential setting designed to mimic actual engagements, from speeches to meet and greets to spontaneous media interactions. It was, essentially, a live-action role-play of a royal tour under pressurized conditions. Why such an extreme approach? Because, according to sources, King Charles was deeply concerned about how Kate would perform post-recovery. She hadn't appeared publicly in over a month. There were questions about her stamina, her confidence, and, most controversially, her willingness to follow the new protocol playbook Charles had personally approved. Let's pause here. Yes, the king had begun micromanaging tour speeches. Why? Because he feared another Diana, a charismatic consort who might overshadow or deviate from the firm's unified messaging. Kate, for all her past discipline, was now seen as a variable, and Charles wanted proof she was ready. The first red flag, the rewrite. The first exercise was a simulated press event. Kate and William were handed prepared remarks. Boilerplate, palace-sanctioned language about shared heritage, mutual respect, and the enduring bond between nations. Kate read it silently, then asked for a pen. "I'd like to make some edits," she said. A senior aide reportedly froze. One quietly texted the king's secretary. "Kate's edits?" Sources claim she wanted to remove the phrase cultural legacy and replace it with complicated history. Add an acknowledgement of indigenous suffering during British colonization. Shift the tone from royal formality to human empathy. William looked surprised, not alarmed, just surprised. He asked her quietly if she was sure. Kate nodded. "I think it's time we speak honestly," she said. The room? Tense. No one stopped her, but they didn't applaud her either. Because in that moment, Kate had done something few royal consorts ever dared. She challenged the script. The second red flag, the protocol clash. Next came the simulation of a school visit. Actors played children and teachers. Kate was instructed to greet dignitaries in a specific order, defer to a mock governor general, and observe exact timing for camera cues. She skipped the cue. Not once. 3 times. Why? Because, according to one staffer, she prioritized talking to the indigenous educator portraying the school principal, even though she was supposed to greet the officials first. That might not seem like a big deal, but in royal protocol, it's a fire alarm. One senior diplomat reportedly took notes and sent them directly to Clarence House. The phrase used? Protocol compromised. Prioritization deviation. Translated, she broke the order. And while the moment seemed innocuous, even compassionate, to observers in the room, the monarchy read it differently. They saw freelancing. They saw a risk. The final blow, the curtain speech. Then came the final test. A mock evening gala. Kate was to deliver a short thank you speech, just 3 minutes. Using a pre-approved teleprompter script, she approached the podium, smiled, paused, and then didn't read the script. Instead, she spoke from memory. And this is what she reportedly began with. "As a mother, I often think about the kind of world we're handing our children. And as we stand here in this country, rich in history, resilience, and truth, I believe our role is not just to celebrate our connection, but to acknowledge what it has cost." Silence. Several aides reached for their phones. One stood up, then sat back down. Kate finished her remarks in under 4 minutes. No stumbles, no drama, just clarity, emotion, strength, but also unsanctioned messaging. And within hours, the tour was on pause. The fallout. 2 days later, King Charles summoned his communications council. The summary? Kate's approach is incompatible with the Crown's current strategy. No press statement was issued. No official reason for the postponement was given. But the message behind palace walls was deafening. She went rogue. And Charles? He'd had enough. William's reaction. William, insiders say, was torn. Privately, he defended her. He called the speech authentic and needed. But publicly, he didn't intervene when the tour was canceled. He didn't call out the double standard. And worst of all, he didn't speak to Kate for 48 hours after the rehearsal. That silence, more than any protocol breach, broke her. Because this wasn't about a tour anymore. It was about trust. And Kate had just learned, in real time, that even her husband was beginning to waver. The hidden recording. Here's where the plot thickens. A former staffer revealed that the entire rehearsal, all sessions, were recorded. Not for training purposes, for review. And allegedly, clips from those recordings made their way to the king. He viewed them not once, but twice. And afterward, he made the call, not just to cancel the tour, but to reactivate the consort assessment file, the same dossier we discussed in Chapter 2. And this time, he made annotations himself, in red ink. Finalized, dated, initialed, a tour that never happened, and a marriage that may not recover. The Australia tour was quietly erased from the palace website's upcoming events section. No explanation, no apology, no follow-up, just gone. But the memory of it still lingers in the corridors of Kensington and Windsor. Because it wasn't just a failed dress rehearsal. It was a referendum on Kate, on her independence, on her unwillingness to play the game. And now, she's not playing at all. She's preparing to speak. And the first words she's about to release, in her own voice, in her own time, are not part of any palace-approved speech. They're part of a letter, a personal letter, addressed to the public. And once it's made public, everything the palace has tried to suppress will come roaring into the light. Is it still revenge if you never raise your voice? If you never slam a door? If you never say her name? In the royal family, power doesn't always come from a crown. Sometimes it comes from silence, from the ability to wait, to watch, to outlast. And no one plays the long game like Queen Camilla. Because while the public has long seen Camilla as the other woman turned royal survivor, those inside palace walls know her as something far more calculating. She's the palace's ultimate strategist. And Catherine, Princess of Wales? She was never Camilla's chosen queen. This wasn't a tabloid catfight. This was succession warfare. And Camilla, after decades of being humiliated, whispered about, and publicly derided, was finally in a position to reshape the future of the monarchy. One woman at a time. The seeds of tension were planted early. From the moment Kate stepped into the royal spotlight, comparisons were inevitable. Diana's grace, Camilla's past, Kate's polished presence. The press adored Kate. They never adored Camilla. And Camilla noticed. She watched as the public and media anointed Kate the People's Princess 2.0, a poised, glamorous young woman married to the future king. Sound familiar? It should. Because it mirrored everything Camilla never got when she married Charles. Where she faced skepticism, Kate was showered with praise. Where she fought to be accepted, Kate was instantly embraced. And no matter how many engagements Camilla fulfilled, Kate's smile on the front page always outshone hers. At first, Camilla played the role. She extended olive branches. She offered advice. She posed with Kate at events, whispered jokes during Trooping the Color, and played the supportive stepmother-in-law. But behind palace doors, a different story was unfolding. A quiet resentment. Not necessarily because Kate had done anything wrong, but because she had done everything right. And for a woman like Camilla, who clawed her way into the royal circle after being branded a villain for decades, that sort of effortless success was unforgivable. Subtle snubs and strategic isolation. Let's talk tactics. Camilla never launched direct attacks. She didn't need to. She had influence, access, the king's ear. And according to insiders, she began using it in subtle but devastating ways. Here's how it worked. Advisor realignment. Camilla began pushing for a shakeup among senior palace staff. Within 18 months of the Queen's passing, at least 3 long-serving aides loyal to Kate were quietly reassigned. In their place, officials with stronger ties to Charles and Camilla's inner circle. Control over royal scheduling. Camilla allegedly lobbied to have final review over shared royal calendars. This meant events Kate once expected to co-lead were now being trimmed, reshuffled, or reattributed. Media access management. A source from a prominent UK tabloid revealed that Camilla's team began restricting Kate's access to favored photographers and press outlets. The result? Fewer front pages, less coverage, more ambiguity. To the public, it seemed like Kate was simply taking a step back. To those within the firm, it was clear she was being pushed. The red carpet incident. There's one incident in particular that insiders still whisper about. It happened at a diplomatic gala in late 2024. Kate and Camilla were scheduled to appear side by side on the red carpet, a united front for international press. But minutes before the event began, Camilla's team made a last-minute change to the car arrivals. Camilla would arrive solo. Kate, delayed by 15 minutes. By the time Kate stepped onto the carpet, most of the photographers had been ushered inside. No crowd, no fanfare, just flashing lights from afar and a muted murmur from reporters who weren't expecting her that late. Kate, according to multiple witnesses, kept her composure. She smiled. She posed. She said nothing. But back inside the palace, she broke down. And when William confronted staff about the scheduling shift, he was told. It was a logistical oversight. But everyone knew. This wasn't logistics. This was hierarchy. Camilla was reminding Kate who the current queen was, and who the future one might never be. Kate's growing influence, a threat to Camilla's legacy. Camilla's unease wasn't just about Kate's media dominance. It was about legacy. See, Camilla's greatest fear wasn't being hated. She's weathered that. Her fear was being forgotten. Charles may have won the throne, but Camilla was never truly embraced by the Commonwealth. Her charity work, while extensive, rarely made headlines. Her popularity remained lukewarm. Kate, by contrast, loved across generations. Young girls dressed like her. Mothers admired her parenting. Older Britons praised her modesty. Everywhere Kate went, she embodied the version of royalty the public wanted. And that made her a problem. Because Camilla didn't just want to secure Charles's legacy, she wanted to outlast it. And for that to happen, Kate had to be minimized. The Australia rehearsal, Camilla's quiet triumph. When the Australia rehearsal blew up in Chapter 4, many assumed the king would handle the fallout alone. But multiple sources confirm that Camilla was present during the review sessions. Not physically, but in every conversation. She played the role of supportive consort, one aide admitted. But behind every question Charles asked about Kate's conduct, you could feel Camilla's fingerprints. It was Camilla who reportedly told Charles, "This isn't about politics. It's about stability." It was Camilla who advised against Kate traveling abroad until further assessments could be made. And it was Camilla who quietly suggested a return to known, reliable figures, meaning herself, for future international engagements. The king listened, and the tour was canceled. Camilla didn't gloat. She didn't need to. She had won. William's growing distrust. But Camilla underestimated one thing. William. He wasn't blind to what was happening. In fact, some say he began reviewing communications between his team and Camilla's office, tracing patterns of obstruction, interference, and manipulation. At one point, according to an insider, William told a senior aide, "Every time we try to move forward, she moves the goalposts." He was angry, but more than that, he was trapped, because confronting Camilla meant confronting his father. And William, still nursing the wounds of the past, wasn't ready to go to war. Not yet. But Kate? She was. Kate's quiet defiance. While Camilla played the long game, Kate began preparing for a counterattack of her own. Not through confrontation, but through documentation. According to whispers from within Kensington Palace, Kate began keeping a private record. A detailed journal of events, meetings, correspondence, and decisions made without her consent. She wasn't gathering it for revenge. She was gathering it for protection. For her children. For her name. For history. Because she knew the game had changed. This wasn't about bad blood. This was about a monarchy being reshaped by those who'd survived it. And Kate? She was done surviving. She was about to start exposing the letter that could burn it down. At the time of this recording, rumors persist that Kate is preparing a personal open letter. Not a press release. Not a memoir. A letter. Written in her voice. Addressed to the British people. It allegedly contains a reflection on her royal journey. A subtle but clear reference to Camilla's interference. And a statement that many palace aides consider a nuclear threat. Truth endures, even when the crown forgets. If released, that letter would destroy the carefully curated narrative of royal unity. It would expose Camilla's real role in Kate's exile. And it would turn the public, many of whom already distrust Camilla, decisively in Kate's favor. And if that happens, Charles won't just lose control of the succession. He'll lose control of his queen's legacy. So what now? Camilla is still on the throne. Kate is still, technically, married. But the balance of power has shifted. Because Kate's silence isn't submission. It's strategy. And behind every calculated move Camilla makes, Kate is already 2 steps ahead. But if you think Camilla is done playing, you're wrong. Because her next move? It won't be against Kate. It will be against the only other woman who has haunted her for years. A woman whose ghost still walks the halls of Windsor. A woman Camilla vowed never to speak of, but now must. And her name? Diana. And what happens next? Will shake the monarchy to its core. What if the fall of one duchess quietly paved the way for the downfall of another? What if the very scandal the palace tried to bury, the scandal of Meghan Markle, became the blueprint for how to dismantle Catherine, Princess of Wales. And here's the real kicker. What if the monarchy didn't learn from the Meghan saga? They repeated it. Only this time, with far more subtlety, far more control, and far more devastating consequences. Because whether the palace will admit it or not, Meghan never left the room. Not really. Her presence, her ghost, her name, her warnings, they all lingered like perfume in an empty hallway. Invisible, undeniable, inescapable. And for Kate, that comparison became a curse. Let's explore how Meghan's royal exile may have directly and indirectly led to Kate's own implosion. This isn't just irony. It's institutional déjà vu, the mirror effect. From the very beginning, the British public was sold a story. Kate versus Meghan. The traditionalist versus the disruptor. The English rose versus the American firecracker. One followed the rules. One rewrote them. One smiled and stayed quiet. The other spoke and got crucified. It was never subtle. The media feasted on the contrast. Why can't Meghan be more like Kate? They'd ask. And for a while, that narrative worked. Kate was celebrated as the embodiment of duty, decorum, and diplomacy. She didn't give interviews. She didn't cry on camera. She didn't challenge the press, at least not publicly. She was everything Meghan wasn't. And that made her safe. Or so we thought. Because behind closed doors, that very image was quietly becoming a liability. Why? Because Kate wasn't perfect. She was controlled, polished, managed, a product of palace conditioning. And the moment she started deviating from that script, speaking up, speaking out, asking for independence, the same machinery that crushed Meghan turned on her. Meghan's early warnings, ignored by Kate? Let's rewind to 2021. Oprah. The interview. The world was stunned as Meghan and Harry peeled back the palace facade and exposed a royal ecosystem built on hierarchy, silence, and survivalism. But one segment stood out. When Oprah asked Meghan if she and Kate had argued before the wedding, Meghan replied, "It was difficult, but she apologized, and I forgave her." Then came the real bombshell. "If you love me, you don't have to hate her." It was a warning. To the press, to the public, to Kate. But what did the palace do? They doubled down on the divide. They used Kate's silence to contrast Meghan's voice. And in doing so, they planted the seed for Kate's own entrapment. Because the second Kate stopped being silent, the second she began showing even a hint of independence, she was no longer the obedient duchess. She became a version of Meghan. And the monarchy only has room for one disruptive woman at a time. Charles's trauma response, no more Meghans. Sources close to the king have revealed something shocking. That Charles, following the Harry and Meghan departure, commissioned a secret internal review titled Future Consorts, Public Integration Risk Assessment. Its purpose? To identify behavioral traits in current or future royal spouses that could lead to narrative instability. One phrase keeps appearing in the leaked memos. Meghan Protocol. Containment, not confrontation. In essence, the palace learned from Meghan, but not in the way you'd hope. They didn't become more supportive. They became more strategic. They built better walls, softer cages, smarter silencing methods. And Kate? She walked right into it. Because once she began pushing back, demanding more say in speeches, questioning protocol, resisting puppet press photo ops, the alarms went off. This wasn't Catherine anymore. This was Meghan 2.0. And the monarchy doesn't do sequels. The too much like Meghan moment. There's one incident royal insiders refer to as the break. It happened during preparations for a mental health campaign in early 2025, an initiative that Kate had spearheaded for years. This time, however, she wanted to include a video segment where she spoke candidly, unscripted, about her own struggles with postpartum anxiety. It was bold. It was real. It was Meghan-esque. The palace said no. They cited narrative risk, unapproved messaging, and, wait for it, optics too closely aligned with Sussex-style vulnerability. Yes, they literally said she was acting too much like Meghan. Kate was livid. According to a senior aide, she reportedly replied, "So honesty is now treason?" And in that moment, something cracked inside her. Not because she'd been censored, but because she'd just seen her future. And it looked exactly like Meghan's past. Public reaction. The irony hits home. Here's where it gets even more brutal. As the Kate divorce rumors began swirling, The same media that once crucified Meghan began drawing comparisons. Headlines like, "Is Kate the new Meghan?" History repeats. The palace turns on another princess. From golden girl to ghosted queen. Suddenly, the public remembered. They remembered Meghan's warnings. They remembered the toxic press coverage. They remembered how quickly the palace isolates women who don't comply. And now, they were watching it happen in real time. To the woman they once believed was untouchable. The irony was suffocating. Even Meghan reportedly reacted. A source close to the Sussexes told a major U.S. outlet. She doesn't celebrate Catherine's pain, but she's not surprised by it, either. Ouch. The two-woman standard. So let's talk about the elephant in the room. The monarchy has a pattern. They elevate royal women, then clip their wings. Diana, Fergie, Meghan, now Kate. And each time, the script is the same. Celebrate her beauty, praise her loyalty, demand her silence, punish her complexity, rewrite the story. And what's worse, they pit these women against each other so no one ever questions the real culprit, the system. For years, Kate unknowingly benefited from that system. She was the contrast to Meghan. Now, she's the warning. The Meghan playbook, rewritten for Kate. Here's how the palace refined their tactics. Meghan was smeared in the press. Kate was simply erased. Meghan was gaslit publicly. Kate was managed privately. Meghan was forced out. Kate was given the illusion of choice. Both stories led to the same outcome: isolation, character assassination, and ultimately divorce. But while Meghan left with her voice intact, Kate is still inside the machine, still under their control. For now, but not for long. The dangerous question the palace hoped you wouldn't ask. Here it is. The question that keeps Charles's advisors up at night. If this could happen to Kate, what does it say about the entire monarchy? If even the perfect Duchess, the one who waited 9 years for her ring, followed every rule, bore 3 heirs, and smiled through every storm, could be deemed unfit, then what hope does the next generation of royals have? What does that say to George? To Charlotte? To Louis? What message does it send? The message is clear. Compliance is not protection. And silence will never save you. Because the crown doesn't reward loyalty. It weaponizes it. Kate's response, Meghan's echo. At the time of this writing, insiders say Kate has begun drafting her own version of events. It's not an interview, not a documentary, not a book, not yet. It's something more deliberate, more restrained, more strategic. But those who've seen drafts say the tone is eerily familiar. Empathetic, measured, but firm. It doesn't attack. It doesn't name names. But it exposes everything, just like Meghan once tried to do. And if Kate releases it, the monarchy may not survive another round. So who really won? That's the question no one can answer. Meghan escaped, but lost her titles. Kate stayed and lost her crown. One found her freedom. The other found her fire, too late. Or maybe just in time. Because history is watching now. And the public? They're not choosing sides anymore. They're questioning the system. And that might be the greatest revenge of all. What if your marriage wasn't just watched, but monitored? Not by the tabloids, not by curious fans, but by your own staff, by the crown, by the very institution that once celebrated your love story and now questioned your every movement. Because in the House of Windsor, privacy isn't a right. It's a privilege. And once the crown starts to suspect you've become unpredictable, it takes that privilege away. Welcome to Chapter 7. The story of how Kate and William's relationship, once hailed as the gold standard of royal romance, quietly became a cold war of observation, control, and whispered betrayal. This wasn't a marriage breaking down behind closed doors. This was a marriage under surveillance. And when the walls have ears, trust dies first. Let's dive in. From honeymoon to honey trap. Let's rewind to a time when William and Kate were untouchable. Their wedding was watched by 2 billion people. Their first royal tour, to Canada and the U.S., was hailed as the new Diana moment. They laughed. They held hands. They whispered on balconies and locked eyes during speeches. This wasn't just marriage. It was monarchy 2.0. But behind that perfect sheen, something darker was being born. Because even at the height of their popularity, the palace was already watching. And not just because of protocol, because of power. You see, when a royal couple becomes too powerful, too adored, too independent, They're no longer just representatives of the crown. They're threats to the people behind the crown. And in the case of Kate and William, their unity became both their shield and their Achilles heel. The internal intel network. Most people assume the palace has press officers and security staff. But what many don't know is that there's an entire internal intelligence system, a quiet, confidential operation designed to track sentiment and behavior. Sources confirm the existence of a rotation-based reporting program, where staff assigned to senior royals submit weekly interpersonal and logistical assessments. These aren't spy reports, per se, but they do include notes on demeanor, reactions during private engagements, observations about communication between couples, shifts in tone, schedule conflicts, even unusual habits. In short, a running psychological dossier. And when things are stable, those reports are dull. But when things aren't, they become evidence. Kate's shifting behavior, the red flags. By mid-2024, reports began noting changes in Kate's behavior. A tendency to cancel engagements at the last minute. Apparent tension during joint appearances with William. Private staff citing frosty morning briefings. But the most worrying entry? A note flagged in red. Her Royal Highness asked to review all digital communication logs between her private secretary and Kensington Palace's press office, without informing the prince. Translated, Kate was no longer just participating in the machine. She was trying to see the machine. And for a consort, that's dangerous. Especially when those emails include private briefings on succession optics. William's distancing tactics. It wasn't one-sided. William was changing too. He began requesting solo scheduling more frequently, using mental health and military charities as an excuse for public solo engagements. In private, he reportedly started spending more nights at Windsor Lodge, away from Kensington. And he began relying more on his own circle, a trusted team of advisors loyal not to the firm, but to him. This division wasn't accidental. It was tactical. Insiders say both William and Kate suspected that their inner circles had been infiltrated by loyalists to King Charles and Queen Camilla. So they tightened their communication, stopped using certain aids. In one case,